The rainy night discovery. Officer James Cooper was wrapping up a long shift on a rainy Tuesday night, patrolling the quiet but tense streets of Chicago's South Side. At 38, he'd seen plenty in his 15 years with the force, a life of tough moments, mixed with profound encounters that often kept him awake at night. His salt and pepper hair and the lines etched deep around his eyes spoke to the stress of the job, but they didn't reflect the empathy he held within. No amount of hardship on the streets had dimmed the compassion that had drawn him to law enforcement, a sense of duty that often set him apart from others in the department. James, a white officer in a predominantly black community, was well aware of the tensions between the police and the neighborhood he served. Over the years, he had made it his mission to bridge the gap, striving to earn the community's trust. But tonight, as the rain drummed against the cruiser's windshield, those thoughts were far from his mind. His focus was locked on a small figure trudging along the soaked sidewalk. Under the glare of his cruiser's headlights, he saw her, a little girl, drenched to the bone, her tiny frame trembling as she clutched a faded pink backpack against her chest. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, her rain-soaked pigtails clinging to her face, her large eyes reflecting a blend of fear and exhaustion. Something about her struck him in a way that few calls on duty ever did. James pulled over, stepping out into the cold rain that fell relentlessly. As he approached, he noted the tear tracks on her face, almost indiscernible amidst the raindrops. He crouched down to her level, his voice soft and calm. "Hey there, sweetheart. What are you doing out here alone?" The little girl looked up, her eyes filled with a silent plea that pierced through him. Her voice was barely a whisper, but her words hit James like a freight train. "Mommy doesn't want me anymore," she said, her bottom lip trembling as fresh tears welled in her eyes. Those words stirred something deep in him, a knot forming in his stomach as he fought to keep his expression steady. He gently placed his hand on her shoulder, shielding her from the rain with his jacket. "What's your name?" he asked, guiding her towards the cruiser. "Lily," she replied, clutching her small backpack closer. James nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "Well, Lily, let's get you somewhere warm." He led her into the cruiser, draping his spare jacket over her shoulders as he turned on the heat. She nestled into the warmth, still shivering, her tiny hands clutching the fabric of the jacket. As he watched her, 1,000 questions ran through his mind. Who would abandon a child like this? Why was she out here, soaked and alone, clutching that backpack as if it held her whole world? Lily's clothes, though soaked, were clean and well kept. Her backpack, though worn from being hugged tightly, was filled with school supplies and a small lunchbox. Nothing about her seemed to scream neglect or abandonment in the traditional sense. The contrast between her appearance and her circumstances raised alarms in James's mind. His gut told him there was more to this story, something hidden in the folds of her fear and sadness. "Lily," he started gently, "can you tell me where you live? We should get you back to your family." But Lily's face twisted with sorrow, and her eyes filled with fresh tears. She shook her head slowly. "I can't go home. Mommy told me to go away. She said she can't keep me safe anymore." Her words came out haltingly, her voice broken and small. James's heart wrenched as he struggled to digest her words. His mind raced through the possibilities. Was her mother struggling with something? Financial issues, maybe, or something worse. His years on the force had exposed him to countless cases of neglect, but nothing like this had ever crossed his path. As James tried to wrap his head around Lily's words, his radio crackled to life, filling the car with static before a voice cut through. "All units, be on the lookout for a missing child. African-American female, age 6, last seen in the vicinity of 79th and Halsted. Name, Lily Thompson." His heart skipped a beat. It seemed someone was looking for Lily after all. But if she was missing, why was she out here? And why did she believe her mother didn't want her anymore? James glanced over at Lily, who sat curled up in his jacket, staring out the window as if the rain held answers she couldn't find. "Lily," he said, his voice gentle, Your mom is looking for you. She's worried about you. Maybe we should go talk to her." But instead of relief, a look of pure terror crossed Lily's face. She shook her head fiercely, shrinking back against the car door, her voice rising with fear. "No, we can't go back. The bad men, they'll find us." James's blood ran cold. He leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "What bad men, Lily? Who's trying to find you?" Through broken sobs, Lily told him a fragmented story of shadowy figures lurking outside their home, her mother's tense whispers on late-night calls, and a hurried move to a different part of town. She spoke of her mother's desperate attempts to protect her, the quiet panic that had settled into their home like an unwelcome guest. "Mommy said we had to hide," she whispered, her eyes wide with remembered fear. "But the bad men found us again." James felt a sinking realization settle in his gut. Whatever was going on, it was far more than a simple case of neglect or abandonment. This was a mother's desperate attempt to shield her daughter from a danger James couldn't yet understand. Just as he was about to radio for backup, a burst of rapid gunfire echoed from a nearby street. James's heart leaped, and he felt the old instincts kick in. He turned to Lily, his tone shifting to match the urgency of the situation. "Lily, I need you to lie down on the seat and stay very still. I'm going to find out what's happening and make sure your mom is safe." The drive was quick but tense, his mind swirling with the implications of what he'd learned. When he arrived at the scene, the flashing lights of other police cars filled the wet streets with strobing red and blue, illuminating the worried faces of onlookers peering from windows and stoops despite the rain. Officers hurriedly set up a perimeter around a small, worn-looking house that fit the description of Lily's last known residence. James parked his cruiser a safe distance from the chaos and turned back to Lily, who was curled up tightly, her small form shivering under his jacket. He took a moment to collect himself before speaking to her, knowing that each word would carry a weight she couldn't yet fully understand. "Stay here and keep the doors locked, okay? I'm going to make sure your mom is okay." With a final reassuring glance, James stepped out into the rain. The gravity of the situation weighed on him, but he pushed forward, his every instinct screaming that tonight would be unlike any other he'd experienced. As he approached the barricade, the chilling realization set in. This wasn't just about a lost little girl. He'd stumbled into a case that threatened not only to shake him to his core, but also to ignite a cascade of revelations that would ripple through the community, forcing everyone, himself included, to confront uncomfortable truths. This was only the beginning of a journey that would redefine what it truly meant to protect and serve. A mother's secret. James kept his eyes fixed on the modest, one-story house surrounded by a perimeter of police vehicles. The rain poured relentlessly, creating a blurry veil over the chaotic scene unfolding in front of him. Officers whispered urgently among themselves, setting up barriers and keeping their distance from the dimly lit house, aware that it was potentially the heart of a dangerous situation. As James approached, his sergeant, Mike Donovan, caught sight of him and waved him over with a grim look. "Cooper, you brought the girl, right? They told me you found her. Is she safe?" Donovan's voice held a note of tension that James rarely heard. James nodded, keeping his voice low. "She's in my cruiser, locked in and safe. But something about this isn't sitting right. She mentioned bad men following her and her mother. I think there's a lot more to this than a missing person call." Donovan's eyes narrowed. Her mother, Tamara Thompson, hasn't been seen since the incident began. Neighbors reported some suspicious activity and gunshots about 20 minutes ago. "We're setting up a team to move in, but things are tense. We don't know who's inside or what they're armed with." James's jaw tightened as he scanned the house. His instincts told him Tamara Thompson wasn't simply a parent in a bad situation. There was something more, something dangerous lurking in her story. He had seen Lily's eyes, the kind of raw fear that couldn't be faked or misunderstood. He knew that what was inside that house was only the tip of a larger problem. "I'm going to approach the house," James said, keeping his gaze firm. We need to find out what's going on and whether she's okay." Donovan hesitated, his hand lingering on his radio. "All right, Cooper, but be careful. If there's anything off, you pull back and wait for the team." He paused, lowering his voice. "And if this is bigger than it seems, keep an eye out. We've had rumors about traffickers and drug runners in this area. Could be that this family got caught in the crosshairs." Nodding, James took a deep breath and approached the house with cautious steps, his eyes darting over the windows and door, noting the eerie stillness inside. The rain muffled the surrounding sounds, and he could only hear the rhythmic splatter of drops hitting the sidewalk beneath his feet. The house was dark except for a faint glow in the front window, but he could make out no shapes or movements inside. He called out, his voice loud enough to penetrate the quiet. "Miss Thompson, this is Officer James Cooper with the Chicago Police Department. We have your daughter, Lily, safe. If you're in there, please come to the door." For a moment, nothing. The house remained silent, lifeless. James felt a creeping worry settle in his chest, and he prepared to call out again. But then, just as he took another step forward, a shadow shifted by the window. The blinds moved, and he could make out the faint outline of a woman, her face obscured but her posture tense. "Officer Cooper," came a woman's voice, wavering and full of exhaustion. I'm here. Please, don't let them take her." Her words were nearly drowned by the rain, but James strained to listen, hearing the desperation in her voice. He gestured for her to come closer, keeping his hands visible and calm. "Miss Thompson, I'm here to help. I have Lily safe, and she's been very worried about you. Please come out. We can keep you both safe." Tamara hesitated, glancing behind her as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. After a tense pause, she opened the door just a crack, enough for James to catch a glimpse of her face. She looked weary, her skin pale and her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. "What's going on, Miss Thompson?" James asked, his tone gentle but firm. "Lily mentioned that you were in danger, something about men following you." Tamara's eyes widened, and she motioned for him to come closer, her voice a frantic whisper. "You don't understand, officer. They're not just following me. They're hunting us. I'm an informant for the FBI." She gripped the edge of the door, knuckles white with fear. "I was supposed to be protected, but someone on the inside must have tipped them off. They found us again, and now we're on the run." James felt a cold chill run down his spine. "You're working with the FBI. On what kind of case?" Her gaze darted around nervously, and she spoke in a hushed tone. "A drug trafficking ring. They're not just dealers. They're part of a network that's connected to other, higher powers, including people inside law enforcement. I'm one of their key witnesses. They want to silence me before I testify." She looked back at the house with a haunted expression. "They found us, tonight." James took a slow, steadying breath. This wasn't just an abandoned child case. Tamara and Lily were caught in the crossfire of a complex criminal network, one that reached into dangerous circles and wielded real power. He stepped back slightly, keeping his voice calm to avoid scaring her. "Tamara, I need you to trust me. I'll help you, but we have to get you and Lily out of here and somewhere safe. Do you know where these men are now?" Her eyes were wide with fear as she nodded. "They're here. I saw one of them in the alley behind the house before I heard the gunshots. I tried to get Lily out before they could come inside." Suddenly, the walkie-talkie on James's belt crackled to life, filling the silence with the voice of one of the officers stationed around the house. "Suspects spotted in the alley, moving north. Units advised to proceed with caution." Tamara looked panicked, glancing back at her empty house. "Please, Officer Cooper," she whispered. "Please, I just need to keep Lily safe." James nodded, feeling the weight of her desperation. He could see the worry etched into every line of her face, the years she had spent on the run from a threat that seemed endless. Her life had been a relentless cycle of fear, and Lily had been dragged into it. He spoke softly, taking her arm in a reassuring grip. "We'll take care of it. But first, let's get you to Lily." He gently steered her away from the house and toward his cruiser, keeping an eye out for any movement around them. As they reached the car, Tamara's gaze softened when she saw Lily bundled up and curled in the passenger seat. James opened the door, letting Tamara slip inside and gather her daughter in a tight embrace. Lily clung to her mother, the fear in her eyes giving way to relief. Tamara held her close, whispering words of reassurance as she smoothed back Lily's damp hair. James took a step back, giving them a moment. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something far bigger than he'd anticipated. The Chicago PD had its fair share of corruption rumors, but if Tamara's story was true, he had just entered a situation that went far beyond anything he'd dealt with before. When Tamara looked up at him again, her expression had shifted from fear to determination. "Officer Cooper, I know I'm putting you in danger by asking for help, but I don't have anyone else. I don't know who I can trust in law enforcement, or if I can trust anyone at all." James gave her a steady look, his resolve hardening. "You can trust me, Tamara. We're getting you somewhere safe, and once we're there, I want to hear everything about this case. If these people are connected to the police department, I need to know exactly what we're up against." They drove in silence, Lily falling asleep in her mother's arms as Tamara kept a protective hold on her, her gaze never wavering from the rainy streets. James knew he had to think carefully about their next steps. This wasn't something he could handle alone, and he wasn't sure how much he could trust even his closest colleagues. But there was one person he thought might help: Detective Sarah Chen, a respected officer in the anti-corruption task force with a reputation for relentless honesty. He pulled over at a quiet motel on the outskirts of the city, one that he had used in the past for sensitive cases. It was nondescript and out of the way, perfect for what they needed. After checking them in, he handed Tamara the key and helped her settle Lily into a room. As Lily slept, James turned to Tamara, his expression serious. "Tomorrow, I'll bring someone I trust to hear your story. She's with the anti-corruption unit, and if anyone can help us, it's her." Tamara looked weary, but nodded, her eyes glistening with a gratitude that spoke volumes. "Thank you, Officer Cooper. I didn't think anyone would care enough to help us." She reached out, her hand squeezing his. As James left the motel, the rain had softened to a light drizzle, but the weight on his shoulders felt heavier than ever. He had crossed a line tonight, taken a step that would surely have consequences. But for the first time in years, he felt he was doing the right thing. He wasn't just upholding the law. He was protecting lives. And that, he knew, was worth any risk he might face. Allies and adversaries. James awoke early the next morning, his mind already racing with the complications ahead. The faint memory of the rain-soaked night lingered, and he knew that by helping Tamara and Lily, he had walked into a high-stakes game with unpredictable players. Today, he would have to reach out to Detective Sarah Chen, a trusted colleague in the anti-corruption task force, who, if anyone, might help him navigate this case without compromising Tamara and Lily's safety. He arrived at the precinct just after dawn, moving quietly through the corridors. The air was thick with the usual mix of tension and caffeine, officers going about their business, oblivious to the secrets James now held. He found Sarah in her office, surrounded by a mess of case files and legal documents, her hair pulled back tightly as she pored over paperwork. She glanced up as he entered, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Cooper, what brings you here this early? You look like you've been up all night." James took a deep breath, stepping further into the room and closing the door behind him. "I need your help, Sarah. I'm involved in a situation that's complicated." Sarah leaned back, raising an eyebrow. "Complicated how?" After a brief pause, James sat down across from her, lowering his voice. "Last night, I found a little girl on the street. She was alone, drenched, and scared out of her mind. Turns out, she and her mother, Tamara Thompson, have been hiding from some dangerous people. Tamara is an FBI informant on a drug trafficking case, but she believes that someone inside law enforcement tipped off the wrong people, and now they're on the run. She's terrified that whoever's after her has someone on the inside. Sarah's face grew serious, her gaze hardening. So, you think there's a mole within the force, one tied to this drug ring? Yes, James said, nodding. And Tamara's been trying to hide from these people, but she can't go to just anyone in the department without risking exposure. I told her I'd bring in someone I trust, someone who might help us navigate this without putting them in even more danger. For a moment, Sarah was silent, her expression unreadable. She leaned forward, her fingers steepled as she met his gaze. You're asking me to risk a lot here, Cooper. If there's a mole, whoever it is could be powerful. We've been tracking similar leads for a while now, but no one's talking. This could open up a path we need, but it's dangerous. James nodded, his face set. I know. And if you're in, we need to move carefully. I want to get Tamara somewhere more secure and try to track down who's been after her. Sarah gave a slight smile, her respect for his determination evident. I'm in, but we do this smart. First, we need to establish an alibi if we're both going to go off-grid for a while. You're too visible after last night. I'll talk to the chief about transferring you to administrative duties for a few days so we can keep this under wraps. They agreed on a plan and set out to meet Tamara and Lily at the motel. Sarah's presence brought a sense of calm that balanced James's intensity, and he was grateful for her unflinching approach to the case. Together, they were a formidable team. By mid-morning, James and Sarah pulled into the motel parking lot. They found Tamara waiting anxiously by the window, her face pale and drawn. Lily sat beside her, distracted by the simple comfort of breakfast, but every now and then, she would cast a watchful eye towards the door, as if expecting danger to burst through at any moment. Tamara ushered them in quickly, casting nervous glances outside. She looked exhausted, the strain of constant fear evident in her movements. Detective Chen, thank you for coming, Tamara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, her tone steady and calming. Tamara, I understand you've been through a lot, and I want to make it clear that we're here to help you. But I need you to tell me everything, every detail, every connection, every suspicion you have. It's the only way we can protect you and Lily. Tamara swallowed hard, casting a nervous glance at Lily, who was coloring on a napkin. She took a shaky breath, then launched into her story, her words halting but full of raw honesty. I got mixed up with these people when I was just trying to make ends meet, Tamara began, wringing her hands. I was working at a small diner downtown, serving tables. I overheard conversations sometimes. Men talking about deals, names, drop-offs. I didn't think much of it at first. But then one night, one of the men saw me listening and offered me money to keep my mouth shut. I needed the money. Lily and I were barely scraping by. Her voice shook slightly, and she paused, casting a wary glance at Lily, who remained absorbed in her drawing. Eventually, I realized what I had stumbled into. They were moving drugs, laundering money. They had connections everywhere. I wanted out, but it was too late. They had my name. They knew where we lived. I went to the FBI, hoping they'd help. They offered protection, but it wasn't enough. Someone kept tipping them off. They kept finding us, no matter where we went. Sarah took notes, her expression thoughtful. Tamara, do you have any idea who might be feeding them information? Anyone you noticed in the FBI or even here in the Chicago PD who seemed off? Tamara hesitated, then nodded slowly. There was one agent, a man named Fletcher. He seemed too familiar with the gang members when we were moved to witness protection. He'd ask odd questions, nothing too obvious, but I always got a bad feeling around him. James and Sarah exchanged glances. Fletcher was a known name in law enforcement circles, but his record had always appeared clean. The idea that he might be involved in corruption was both shocking and plausible. Sarah tapped her notepad thoughtfully. This Fletcher, he could be our mole. We'll need to look into him without raising any alarms. James placed a reassuring hand on Tamara's shoulder. We're going to get you and Lily somewhere safe, and we'll work on building a case. But we're going to have to move carefully. A sudden knock on the door startled them. James motioned for Tamara to stay quiet and took a step towards the door, peering through the peephole. His breath caught. Outside stood Sergeant Donovan. Heart pounding, James whispered, "Sarah, it's Donovan." She tensed. Did he see us come in? James shook his head. No idea. But if he's looking for us, it could be trouble. Tamara looked terrified, clutching Lily close as Sarah motioned for her to stay silent. James opened the door a crack, putting on a composed expression. "Sergeant Donovan, what brings you here?" Donovan glanced inside, his gaze landing on Tamara and Lily. His eyes narrowed slightly, though he quickly masked any sign of suspicion. "I came to check in on you. The department's been buzzing about your little heroics last night, and I wanted to make sure you're handling things appropriately. Protocol, you know." James kept his tone light, giving nothing away. "I've got everything under control, Sergeant. Just taking care of business as usual." Donovan's gaze lingered on James for a moment too long, his eyes flicking to Sarah and then back to Tamara. "Glad to hear it. But remember, Cooper, people are watching closely. These cases can get messy, especially when witnesses go off the radar." There was an edge to his voice that made James's skin crawl, but he maintained his calm, nodding politely. "Understood, Sergeant. Thanks for the reminder." As Donovan walked back to his car, a wave of unease settled over the room. Sarah turned to James, her expression grave. "He knows something. We can't stay here." James nodded, his mind already racing through potential hideouts. "Let's move them to a safe house. I know a place, one that even our department won't be able to track easily." Tamara looked between them, her face pale. "Are we really in that much danger?" Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression softening. "Yes, but we're not giving up on you. We're going to keep you and Lily safe. But we have to act quickly." Later that night, they arrived at a small remote cabin on the edge of the city, a place James had used once before to hide a vulnerable witness in a case involving gang violence. It was isolated, with thick trees surrounding it, and no direct road visible from the main highway. Once inside, Tamara and Lily were settled into a back room, while James and Sarah convened in the small living area, laying out their plan. They discussed the need to compile solid evidence before they could go public with Tamara's story. Fletcher, the FBI agent Tamara had named, would be their first lead. They needed proof that would make his connection to the gang undeniable. Sarah leaned forward, her tone determined. "We start with surveillance, see if we can find patterns in Fletcher's communications and his movements. If he's dirty, we'll find something." James nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "And once we get enough evidence, we bring in the feds, those we can trust, and take him down." They were interrupted by a small sound behind them. Turning, they saw Lily standing in the doorway, clutching a stuffed animal, her eyes large with confusion. "Are you going to help us?" she asked quietly. James softened, nodding. "Yes, Lily. We're going to keep you and your mom safe. That's a promise." The little girl nodded, hugging her toy tighter as she returned to the back room where her mother waited. James and Sarah exchanged a silent vow. They would protect this family, no matter the cost. As the weight of their mission settled on them, they knew they were up against a powerful force, one that had infiltrated their ranks and threatened to tear apart the very system they had sworn to uphold. But despite the risks, they were resolved. This was more than just a case. It was a fight for truth, justice, and the lives of the innocent. And as James looked out into the quiet night, he knew there was no turning back. Beneath the surface, the following day brought a crisp morning light that filtered through the cabin's narrow windows. For James, The brightness outside felt like a jarring contrast to the dark web he and Sarah were untangling. Inside, the cabin buzzed with quiet tension, a feeling shared by everyone. Lily had slept peacefully for the first time in days, but Tamara was visibly worn, her eyes lined with exhaustion as she tried to maintain a brave face for her daughter. James and Sarah had stayed up late, poring over everything they knew about the case, filling in gaps and listing all the ways things could go wrong. By sunrise, they had crafted a plan to gather enough evidence to connect Agent Fletcher to the drug ring, ensuring they had hard proof before going to anyone else in law enforcement. Sarah glanced at James as they sat with coffee cups, mapping out their next moves. "We're going to need someone on the inside who can access secure records without raising suspicion. I'm thinking of Detective Rivera in records. She's clean, thorough, and has no connections with Fletcher or the FBI. We get her on board, and maybe we can dig up some of his phone logs, communications, something." James nodded, his mind already working through the logistics. "I'll reach out to her today. But if we want this to stay under wraps, we'll need a plausible cover for why we're combing through an agent's records." Sarah smirked. "I'll say it's part of a cross-agency collaboration project. She's used to those." Just then, Tamara appeared at the doorway, looking like she'd barely rested. Her gaze was hollow as she hugged her arms around herself. What are the next steps?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. James gestured for her to sit down, his voice reassuring. "Sarah and I will be looking into Fletcher, the agent you mentioned. We're gathering evidence, trying to find anything that could connect him to the people who've been after you. Meanwhile, you and Lily stay here, out of sight." Tamara nodded, casting a nervous glance back toward the room where Lily still slept. "I just want this nightmare to end. She's been through too much already. Every time I think we're safe, someone else shows up. I can't keep running. I can't keep doing this to her." James placed a hand on her shoulder, a steady reminder that she wasn't alone in this. "We're going to put an end to it, Tamara. And we're going to make sure you and Lily have a future free from fear." That afternoon, James went to meet Detective Rivera at her office in records. He had worked with Rivera on a few cases before, and her meticulousness was well known. She greeted him with a polite but curious smile, her brow arching slightly at the unexpected visit. "James Cooper," she said, folding her arms and leaning against her desk. "What brings you down here? Need another file pulled?" James managed a friendly smile. "Actually, yes. But it's not just any file." He took a deep breath, his tone shifting to one of sincerity. "I'm looking into an agent, Fletcher, from the FBI. I can't go into detail, but I need you to pull any records of his communications with certain high-profile suspects we've been tracking. And I need it to stay between us." Rivera's expression turned serious, her eyes sharpening with concern. "Fletcher, you're looking at someone from the Bureau." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Is this about the Thompson case? Because there's been buzz around here about some irregularities in witness protection cases, rumors that certain witnesses have been lost. No one's confirmed it, but—" James nodded, letting her fill in the blanks. "Yes, it's about that case, but I can't have anyone else on this yet. You're the only one I can trust to do this without raising red flags." Rivera nodded, her expression resolute. "I'm in. Give me a few hours, and I'll let you know what I find. But if anyone asks, you didn't get this from me." James thanked her, a wave of relief washing over him. He knew the risks he was asking her to take, and he didn't take her trust lightly. While James met with Rivera, Sarah set up a private meeting with a tech-savvy contact she trusted, David Lim, a former cybercrimes officer turned consultant. David was known for his knack for tracking down digital footprints and piecing together timelines that others missed. If there were any hidden connections between Fletcher and known gang associates, David would find them. They met at a quiet cafe in the Loop, where Sarah kept her tone hushed and focused. "David, I need you to look into an FBI agent named Fletcher," Specifically, I need you to find any unofficial communications he might have had with people connected to the 8th Street gang, and any offshore accounts or unexplained wire transfers in his name." David raised an eyebrow, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "That's a tall order, Sarah. And FBI agents' records aren't exactly public access. I'm guessing this has to stay off the books." She nodded, her voice soft but firm. "It does. The fewer people who know, the better." After a thoughtful pause, David leaned back, his eyes taking on a calculating glint. "All right, but you owe me a big one. I'll need about 48 hours, and don't be surprised if I have to dig into some shady forums to get what you're looking for." Back at the cabin, James and Sarah reconvened with Tamara, briefing her on their progress and the next steps. Sarah explained that, if all went well, they would have actionable evidence on Fletcher soon, something substantial enough to warrant an investigation from higher up without putting Tamara and Lily in further danger. But as the evening dragged on, a chilling sense of unease began to settle over James. Despite their progress, the case had grown exponentially more dangerous. He knew Fletcher and his contacts wouldn't sit idly by while their network unraveled. They'd retaliate, and if they even suspected Tamara was in hiding, they'd search every inch of the city to track her down. And then, as if summoned by his thoughts, his phone vibrated. He looked down to see a message from Rivera. "Cooper, we need to talk. Now. Urgent." James found Rivera waiting for him at a secluded park, her face tense as she paced by a bench beneath the dim glow of a street lamp. As he approached, she motioned for him to sit, her expression grave. "I found something," she said, her voice low and steady. "Fletcher has been moving money through a series of offshore accounts, some under his name, others under aliases. But here's where it gets disturbing. He's been making regular payments to a security contractor known for handling special removals. And those payments match up almost exactly with the dates certain witnesses went missing. The most recent one was only a few days ago, shortly before you found Lily." James felt his blood go cold. "Are you saying he's hiring people to eliminate witnesses?" Rivera nodded, her expression grim. "Yes, and he's thorough. Fletcher has contacts with law enforcement in almost every major department, including here. He's been slipping through the cracks for years, covering his tracks. But here's the problem. Now that we know this, we're a threat to him." James clenched his jaw, his mind racing. "Which means we need to move quickly. We have to get this information to Sarah and the others without tipping him off." But Rivera looked worried. "Cooper, you need to be careful. Word is already spreading that you're poking around where you shouldn't. People are watching you, and they won't hesitate to get rid of anyone who jeopardizes Fletcher's operations. This case could go far deeper than we realize." James knew she was right. They were on the precipice of something massive, something that would either bring Fletcher's entire operation crashing down or destroy them in the process. He thanked Rivera and headed back to the cabin, every instinct telling him that the next few hours would be critical. Back at the cabin, James found Sarah and Tamara waiting anxiously. He briefed them on what Rivera had uncovered, the stark reality of Fletcher's ruthless methods settling heavily on all of them. Tamara's face paled, her grip on the table tightening. "So he's been killing witnesses. All those people they promised would be safe. They're all." James reached out, his voice soft but resolute. "Not all of them, and we're not going to let him do this to you and Lily. We're too close now." Sarah straightened, her face set with determination. "The only way to keep them safe is to take Fletcher down. And if he has contacts in the department, then we need to gather every piece of evidence we have and go straight to the feds. No stopping, no detours." But even as they prepared for the final stages of their plan, James felt a gnawing sense of urgency. They had no guarantee that Fletcher or his associates weren't already on their trail. And if he knew about James's involvement, or worse, Sarah's, their window of opportunity would be painfully short. Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her tone firm yet reassuring. We're doing the right thing, James. We're fighting for justice for Lily and Tamara. Whatever happens, they need us to be strong right now." James nodded, grateful for her steadiness amidst the storm they were facing. Together, they would protect Tamara and Lily. But even as he steeled himself for the battle ahead, he couldn't shake the feeling that Fletcher was lurking somewhere in the shadows, watching, waiting for them to make a mistake. The trap and the truth. By nightfall, the cabin was cloaked in a tense quiet, the kind that made every creak in the floorboards feel like a threat. James, Sarah, Tamara, and Lily had spent the past few hours running through their escape plan should things go sideways. With each passing minute, James's instincts grew sharper, a constant reminder that they were working against a ruthless adversary. Fletcher was no longer just a corrupt agent. They now knew he was a deadly one, willing to kill anyone who stood in his way. Sarah had connected with David Lim earlier that afternoon, and his findings confirmed their worst fears. Fletcher's offshore accounts were a financial roadmap to his operations. Large sums of money were transferred in regular intervals to known gang associates, and disturbing evidence pointed to payments made to an elusive hitman known only as Hawk, rumored to specialize in quiet removals of high-profile witnesses and informants. According to David, Hawk was not just a name. He was a ghost. No known picture, no past arrests, but a reputation that lingered like a grim whisper among those in law enforcement. James leaned against the kitchen counter, tension coiled tight within him. If Hawk's involved, this isn't just about us tracking Fletcher. He'll be coming for Tamara and anyone helping her. We're all at risk. Tamara, sitting at the edge of the table, wrapped her arms around herself. What if he already knows we're here? Her voice was barely a whisper, filled with a fear that made James's chest tighten. Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice calm but resolute. Tamara, if he knew we were here, he would have made a move by now. Fletcher's the type to watch and wait until he's certain of his target. We're in a race against him, but we still have a chance to stay one step ahead. James felt a surge of determination as he looked at the three people counting on him to bring this to an end. The danger was real, but so was their resolve. And now, they had something Fletcher and his network didn't. David had found a weakness, one hidden in plain sight. According to David, Sarah began, Hawk doesn't always act alone. He sometimes works with intermediaries, lower-level gang members who scout for him. If Fletcher needs a job done discreetly, he might send a signal through them first. James's eyes narrowed as he processed this. If we know where these intermediaries are, we might be able to set a trap. If Hawk is scouting for Tamara, we can intercept him. But that's a risky move. It could easily backfire if Fletcher catches wind. A soft voice broke the tense silence. Mommy, I'm scared. Lily had awoken, her small frame silhouetted in the dim light, her wide eyes full of worry. She clutched her stuffed rabbit, the one toy she'd kept since they'd gone on the run. James knelt down, his voice gentle. I know you're scared, Lily, but we're going to keep you safe, okay? We're not going to let anyone hurt you or your mom. Lily nodded, her gaze steady despite the fear in her eyes. She looked up at her mother and whispered, Mommy, will we ever be safe again? Tamara pulled Lily into her arms, her voice shaking but full of resolve. Yes, baby, we will. Officer James and Detective Sarah are here to help us. Sarah met James's gaze, her expression softening for just a moment. James, we should go tonight. If we're setting a trap, it's best to catch them off guard. He agreed, and after a few moments of planning, they left Tamara and Lily safely hidden in the cabin, promising to return as soon as they could. They took an unmarked car from a police stash James knew about, one that would let them drive through the city unnoticed. Their destination was a known gang hideout on the west side, a grimy, run-down bar where information traded hands as casually as drinks. When they arrived, the bar was filled with a crowd of locals and gang affiliates, laughter and music muffling the tension James and Sarah felt as they slipped inside. They scanned the room, each instinctively zeroing in on different figures, reading the undercurrents of distrust and familiarity. They moved toward the back, where a group of men stood, watching the room like hawks. One of them, a tall, wiry man with a jagged scar down his cheek, met their gaze and narrowed his eyes. Sarah stepped forward first, her expression cold but composed. "Looking for a man known as Hawk. We know he's been asking about certain people, and we have a message for him." The scared man smirked, leaning against the bar. "Hawk doesn't take messages, lady, and you've got the wrong place if you're looking for people like that." But James could tell he was lying. He moved closer, his voice low and sharp. "Listen, we know he's around, and we know what he's looking for. Either you tell us where he is, or I can make things very difficult for you and your friends here." The man's smirk faded, replaced with a hint of fear as he eyed them both. "Look, I don't know much, but Hawk doesn't show up unless he's sure it's worth his time. He's all about the money. He likes things neat and clean. But if he's working for Fletcher, you'd best stay out of his way." Sarah's gaze was like ice. "Fletcher's time is running out, and Hawk's a loose end we need to tie up. Now, unless you want us to make that harder, you'll tell us where we can find him." The man hesitated, but finally he gave a small nod, motioning towards a darkened alleyway behind the bar. "There's a spot down on 43rd where he's been meeting with people. Don't know when he'll show, but if you're looking to meet him, that's the place." James and Sarah didn't waste time. They left the bar, slipping into the night towards 43rd Street, where the empty silence of the streets amplified the tension between them. This was their chance, their only chance, to corner Hawk before he had time to act. They parked a few blocks down, moving quietly through the shadows toward the alley, where only the occasional flickering streetlight provided any illumination. As they approached, James's senses were on high alert, every sound and shadow seeming to hold a potential threat. They found a spot to wait, partially hidden behind a dumpster, their breathing quiet as they watched for any sign of movement. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last, until finally they heard footsteps echoing down the alley. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, a man dressed in black, his face obscured beneath a dark cap, moving with the quiet grace of someone well-practiced in the art of stealth. "Hawk." James's pulse quickened as he exchanged a glance with Sarah, both of them silently confirming that this was their target. But before they could make their move, Hawk stopped, his gaze sweeping the alleyway. He was no amateur. He'd likely sensed something was off. With a flash of movement, Sarah stepped out from behind the dumpster, her weapon drawn but her stance calm. "Hawk, we need to talk." Hawk's eyes narrowed as he took in her stance, his own hand inching towards his weapon. "Cops, huh? You must be desperate to track me down like this. What do you want?" James stepped forward, keeping his distance, but making sure Hawk saw his weapon as well. "We know you're working with Fletcher, and we know you're targeting Tamara Thompson and her daughter. But Fletcher's running out of time, and if you're smart, you'll cut ties before you go down with him." Hawk's mouth twisted into a mocking grin. "You think Fletcher's scared of you? He's got more contacts than you can imagine. Taking him down is like chopping off a branch of a tree. There's always another one growing." James clenched his jaw, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're playing with fire. Fletcher's not untouchable, and neither are you. We have enough on him to bring in the bureau. If you cooperate, we can work something out." But Hawk just laughed, his voice echoing eerily through the alley. "You think I'm just going to betray him? I get paid to stay quiet, and I'm good at it. Besides, if I help you, who's going to protect me when Fletcher finds out?" Sarah took a step closer, her gaze unyielding. "You're right. Cooperating has its risks, but staying loyal to Fletcher means you'll be the one on the run soon enough. If you help us, we can offer witness protection, get you out before everything crashes down." Hawk's gaze flickered with uncertainty for a brief moment before he shrugged, his expression hardening. "I'd rather take my chances." With a swift motion, he drew his weapon, forcing James and Sarah to dive behind the dumpster as gunfire erupted in the narrow alley. The shots echoed, shattering the silence as James and Sarah returned fire, the darkness and shadows making it difficult to see. Hawk was fast, slipping between cover as he fired back, and it became clear that he wasn't going down without a fight. Just as they thought they had him cornered, Hawk pulled something from his pocket, tossing it onto the ground with a sharp click. A flashbang. The alley lit up with a blinding flash of light and sound, disorienting James and Sarah as they struggled to regain their focus. By the time their vision cleared, Hawk was gone, his footsteps fading into the distance as he melted into the darkness of the surrounding streets. James cursed under his breath, frustration gnawing at him as he realized Hawk had slipped through their fingers. But even as they stood in the aftermath, Sarah placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "We'll get him," she said firmly. "He can't hide forever. And now he knows we're after him." They returned to the cabin, their resolve stronger than ever. Fletcher and Hawk were playing a dangerous game, but now James and Sarah had seen them up close, knew their tactics and ruthlessness firsthand. They had faced the darkness, and though they hadn't captured it, they had come out stronger. As they walked back into the cabin, Tamara met their gaze, her face a mixture of worry and hope. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She could see it in their eyes. They were ready for the final confrontation, no matter the cost. With grim determination, James and Sarah knew this was the beginning of the end. Fletcher's network was on borrowed time, and they would ensure that he, Hawk, and everyone else involved would face the justice they had evaded for too long. The final reckoning. In the quiet hours before dawn, the cabin was silent, each occupant waiting for what they knew would be a decisive day. James and Sarah had returned with the knowledge that their enemy was as elusive as he was deadly. Hawk had managed to slip through their grasp, but not without leaving behind a sense of his methods and his weaknesses. They were closer than ever to bringing Fletcher's empire crashing down, but time was slipping through their fingers. Every passing moment meant more danger for Tamara and Lily. David Lim had called just after midnight, confirming that Fletcher's connections extended deep into law enforcement and beyond. Financial records showed payments to officers, contractors, and several well-placed informants who helped him keep tabs on anyone threatening his network. This wasn't just about drug trafficking. Fletcher had built a web of corruption that ran into nearly every branch of local law enforcement. As the first hint of daylight crept into the sky, James turned to Sarah, his face set with determination. "If we're going to end this, we need to hit him where it hurts. We have to go public, expose everything we've uncovered, and force the department and the FBI to act." Sarah nodded, her gaze steady. "But we can't do it alone. We need a direct line to someone high up in the Bureau, someone beyond Fletcher's reach. If we make a move within the local force, we risk tipping him off. He has people everywhere." James considered this, an idea forming. "There's a federal prosecutor I know, a woman named Linda Reyes. She's one of the most uncompromising, by-the-book prosecutors in the city. If anyone will take this seriously, it's her. But she's not someone you just call up. We'll need to reach her through secure channels. Make sure we don't alert Fletcher." After a tense discussion, they decided that Sarah would contact Reyes under the guise of a routine inquiry. If Reyes could be trusted, she'd pick up on the coded language and arrange a meeting. Meanwhile, James would gather the remaining evidence they needed to ensure Fletcher's network was exposed. It was a long shot, but they didn't have any other choice. Fletcher was too deeply embedded. Only a coordinated takedown, led by federal forces, would be able to dismantle his network. By midday, Sarah's call had paid off. Reyes had agreed to meet them in an old warehouse district near the Chicago River, a place as far from prying eyes as they could hope for. She hadn't asked questions, simply provided an address and a time. Sarah's instincts told her that Reyes was as sharp as ever, and if anyone could see through their coded message, it was her. James drove the unmarked car to the rendezvous point, Sarah riding beside him, and Tamara and Lily safely tucked in the back seat. They kept the windows rolled up, scanning the streets for any sign they'd been followed. Tension weighed heavily on all of them as they pulled into the empty lot. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and Lily's quiet breathing as she clung to her mother's side. Rise was already there, her car discreetly parked near the entrance of the warehouse. She stepped out, her sharp gaze assessing the situation as James and Sarah approached. Dressed in a tailored suit, her presence radiated authority, and her eyes held the calm, unwavering resolve of someone who had seen it all. "Officer Cooper, Detective Chen," she greeted them, her voice low. "You called me here for something urgent, I presume." James took a deep breath, casting a glance at Tamara and Lily before turning back to Reyes. "Yes, we have evidence that Agent Fletcher of the FBI has been running a drug trafficking operation, protected by a network of paid informants and corrupt officers. He's been silencing witnesses through a contract killer. We believe he's after Tamara and her daughter, Lily, because she's one of the key witnesses." Reyes's expression hardened, but she kept her voice even. "This is a serious accusation, Cooper. Do you have evidence to back this up?" Sarah stepped forward, handing over a thick folder of records, financial transfers, and phone logs that David had painstakingly pieced together. "It's all here, Ms. Reyes, and we have more where this came from. Fletcher's been using his position to stay one step ahead, but this trail leads directly to him." Reyes flipped through the documents, her expression unreadable as she absorbed the information. Finally, she looked up, her gaze meeting theirs with a spark of determination. "This is enough to get us started. I'll initiate an internal investigation, but we need to act quickly. If Fletcher even suspects we're onto him, he'll disappear. And if his hitman, Hawk, is as dangerous as you say, then Tamara and Lily need immediate protective custody." James nodded. "We'll need to coordinate this carefully. Fletcher's network runs deep, and if he gets wind of what's happening, he'll cut his losses and vanish. We need to draw him out, make him think he's still in control." Rice thought for a moment, her gaze sharp. "If you can give me a way to draw him out, some way to make him believe his network is still intact, I'll take it from there. But it has to be airtight." After a moment's consideration, Tamara spoke up, her voice wavering but resolute. "I can help with that." All eyes turned to her as she took a deep breath. "I know how Fletcher thinks. If I give him a location, somewhere he believes we're hiding, it could be enough to lure him in." Sarah shook her head. "Tamara, that's too dangerous. If something goes wrong." Tamara cut her off, her gaze steely. "I can't keep running. I need to face this, for Lily's sake and for everyone else he's hurt. I want to help bring him down." James watched her, a surge of respect mixed with fear for her safety. He knew the risk she was taking, but he also knew that Fletcher would need a solid reason to come out of hiding. Tamara's offer, as dangerous as it was, might be the only way to guarantee that. After a tense silence, Rice nodded. "If you're certain, we'll coordinate with you to set the location and the details, but you'll be protected at all times. Once Fletcher shows, we'll have enough to bring him in." That night, they finalized the plan. Tamara would contact Fletcher through a secure line she remembered from her time working with him, hinting that she was desperate and willing to negotiate for her safety. They arranged a meeting point, a deserted train yard near the city's edge, and stationed undercover agents at strategic positions to close in as soon as Fletcher arrived. Rise ensured that only her most trusted federal agents were involved, cutting off all potential leaks to keep Fletcher from finding out. The hours leading up to the rendezvous were tense, each of them knowing the risk they were about to take. James stayed close to Tamara and Lily, offering quiet reassurances even as he grappled with his own fear. This was it, the final showdown. Either they would expose Fletcher, or it would be walking into a trap from which there was no escape. The train yard was dark and silent, the only sounds the occasional rustling of wind and the distant echo of passing cars. Undercover agents took their positions, each one hidden and armed, ready to move at a moment's notice. James, Sarah, and Reyes watched from a secure distance, keeping a close eye on Tamara and Lily, who were stationed inside an old, abandoned train car. Minutes felt like hours as they waited, the tension thickening with each passing second. Just as doubt began to creep in, headlights appeared on the far side of the yard, followed by the sound of tires crunching over gravel. A dark SUV rolled to a stop, and a figure stepped out. It was Fletcher. James felt a surge of adrenaline as he watched Fletcher approach the train car, his posture confident, as if he believed he had already won. But as he came closer, he paused, his gaze sweeping over the empty yard, his instincts kicking in. He sensed something was wrong. James barely breathed as he watched Fletcher pull out his phone, dialing quickly. After a moment, he spoke into the phone, his voice low and terse. "I don't like this. Something feels off. Get Hawk on the line. I want backup." From her hidden position, Reyes gave the signal, and the agents moved in. Within seconds, the yard was swarming with federal agents, their weapons trained on Fletcher as they closed in. Fletcher's eyes widened, his confident facade crumbling as he realized he was trapped. He spun around, looking for an escape, but there was none. Reyes stepped forward, her tone cold and authoritative. "Agent Fletcher, you're under arrest for conspiracy, drug trafficking, and the murder of multiple witnesses." Fletcher's face twisted in rage, but he raised his hands, a mocking smile playing on his lips. "You think you've won. You have no idea who you're dealing with." James stepped forward, his voice steady. "No, Fletcher. You're the one who underestimated us. And now, it's over." As the agents moved to restrain him, a commotion broke out nearby. A man had appeared, aiming his weapon directly at Tamara and Lily's hiding spot. It was Hawk, moving with deadly intent, his expression cold and focused. He had slipped through their perimeter, coming for one last attempt at his target. Without hesitation, James charged toward the train car, his weapon drawn as he shouted for Hawk to stand down. Hawk fired a shot, narrowly missing James, who ducked behind a metal crate and returned fire. The sound of gunfire echoed through the yard as agents moved to flank Hawk, but he was relentless, firing back with precision and speed. Finally, in a moment of exposed vulnerability, Hawk paused to reload, giving James the opening he needed. He surged forward, tackling Hawk to the ground and disarming him in a swift, brutal move. Within seconds, agents were on Hawk, restraining him as he snarled, his gaze cold and unrepentant. Tamara and Lily emerged from the train car, shaken but unharmed, and James pulled them into a protective embrace, relief washing over him. It was over. Fletcher and Hawk were in custody, their network dismantled. The nightmare that had haunted Tamara and Lily for years had finally come to an end. In the weeks that followed, Fletcher's arrest sent shockwaves through the FBI and law enforcement communities. His network of corruption unraveled, leading to multiple arrests and a massive overhaul in internal protocols. Sarah, James, and Reyes were hailed as heroes, their actions sparking a citywide movement for transparency and reform within law enforcement. Tamara and Lily were granted full protective custody, eventually resettling in a new city under new identities. But even with their new life, they kept in close contact with James, who had become a steadfast friend and protector to them both. On a quiet afternoon months later, James received a letter from Lily. In her small, careful handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for helping us be safe. I'll never forget you. You'll always be our hero." As James read the words, he felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had finally fulfilled his duty, not just as a cop, but as a protector, a friend, and a believer in justice. He had not only changed the lives of Tamara and Lily, he had changed himself, becoming the kind of man who would stop at nothing to do what was right. And as he folded the letter, he knew that the work was far from over. There would always be another fight, another injustice to expose. But with allies like Sarah, Reyes, and the people he fought to protect, he was ready to face whatever came next.